So thanks for joining me. My name is Yazin Akkawi. I work with Pixl. We're a user experience design shop in Chicago, based out of here. We're consulting on user interface design, information architecture. We work across all disciplines, anything with a digital component like a website, an app, or really anything with an interface. We're one of the few firms in Chicago that's dedicated solely to user experience design. And so that's really exciting for us because we love what we do, and a lot of people rely on us for that. So I'll give you some full disclosure first. I'm going to be talking about design, but I'm going to be talking about design from a very unique paradigm. I head all the user research efforts at Pixl, so my paradigm is very objective. So I look at things from a very measurable standpoint rather than a development standpoint or an interaction design standpoint and how we can leverage prototyping to make better designs. Before I get started, though, I want to just kind of gauge how many designers are in the audience right now. That's quite a bit of people. That's like almost half. Oh, one more too. Thank you. So that's pretty cool because it's a good indication of how the industry is growing, like how the discipline is becoming more and more valuable as there's more people going into design, more people hiring designers. So talk to me afterwards. Do something a little different. I mean, I'll have a Q&A afterwards, but feel free to tweet any comments, questions, call me out on bullshit to Pixl team. My partner Jonathan's here somewhere. Where's he at, Jonathan? It's right there in the corner. So he'll be responding to your questions or comments along the way. I mean, if I was you, if I was in your position, I'd probably be on Twitter at least 2 or 3 times during any presentation, even if it was like Steve Jobs talking up here. So I'm not going to fight it. I'll just embrace it. So feel free to any questions, just reach out to us right now, and we'll do it in real time. So first, I'll define for those of you that aren't as familiar with user experience design, like what is user experience design? And it's the intersection of these 3 components: technology, user needs, and the business goals. So it's a very unique process that includes both creative, it's a very creative process, but also very scientific, very objective too, as I'll speak biasly towards throughout this entire presentation. Fortunately for designers, though, these 2 things meet more than most people think. So the business goals and the user needs are aligned way more often than you would think. So, for example, I'll just give you, like, instead of elaborating on that, I'll just give you a few examples on when that happens. So for the user, through design, we solve problems like, I want to pay. Why do you make it so hard for me to give you my money? It's like, I want your product, but the checkout process is just it's such a pain in the butt. I need help with your product, but I don't feel like calling you. Why can't I just find the answer myself? But most importantly, I do business with you all the time. Why does it feel like you don't know me at all? Like, this is the critical component of user experience design. This is what makes or breaks a product, an app, or a website. I mean, it's critical. It's absolutely critical. I mean, businesses have been built on answering this question. Companies like Apple, companies like Airbnb, like Amazon. When Jeff Bezos started Amazon, his budget for what he called customer experience, and this was way before the word user experience was even invented, he spent 100% of his budget on creating and building out the experience rather than marketing. And look where that got Amazon today. So it's critical. And so to summarize, a good user experience is understandable, it's actionable, it's engaging, and it's efficient. It's all of these things. So what do I mean by that? Like, what's a good example? Vine. I love Vine. Has anyone in the audience never used Vine or never heard of it? Just 2? 3? 4? I really want to get a number because it's just like, this is mind-blowing. I love this app. So Vine it's an app it's a social networking app where you record videos and it loops on a 6-second basis. So instead of going through Instagram and scrolling through a feed of images, you're scrolling through a feed of looping videos. It's really entertaining, really fun. But what's most incredible about Vine is that they invented an incredibly novel way to record video. So you'll see here 2 things that I highlighted. When the user first gets to the recording page for the first time, they're presented with one option, one actionable option, and it's the X button on the top right corner. Everybody knows what the X button is. It's to cancel whatever action you're currently engaged in. But there's nothing else. There's no other button on the bottom of the screen other than the video. And it's super compelling because the user's attention is directed straight to that video when the camera is enabled. They recognize that. They'll start maneuvering, seeing how the interaction between the movement of the camera and the response coming from the recordings. But nothing records yet because once you're there for the first time, you get sort of like an onboarding. But it's not invasive. It's not covering the screen. It's not there's no other buttons, so it's not like, get out of my way, I want to continue exploring. It's right there, and it's one action. And it tells you, find something to record, then hold your finger on the screen. Super simple. But what's really remarkable about Vine, what really makes the user experience so engaging, is the immediate feedback from the interface. As soon as you press the video, the green bar on top of the image starts to expand. It starts to grow. And it's giving you instant feedback on how much time you've recorded and how much time you have left. And as soon as you've recorded enough content to be able to post, there's an indication on the bottom right side of the screen that says you're able to post now. So this is part of user experience that I think a lot of people overlook, is the fact of not just is it usable and is it easy, but how does it feel? It's something that's beyond metrics, that's beyond any sort of measurement, right? It's an emotion, it's not articulated, it just feels refreshing. And so because of that, Vine is all four of these things. It's understandable, it's actionable, it's engaging, and it's efficient. And it's really good at all these things. And that's why millions of people love the app and millions of people use it every single day. So, it's a pretty brief rundown on what user experience design. I've given you a little bit of detail on what it is, how it's defined, and what a good example of it is. So I'm sure you're wondering, for those of you that aren't as familiar with user experience design, well, how do you do that? How do you go about making a good app or a good website with good UX? So UX is dynamic. It's really as simple as a straight line. Totally kidding. It's not even close. UX design looks more like this, right? Where you start with a bunch of ideas. You start with a bunch of opinions, a bunch of data, information. I mean, it's all over the place. And over time, you converge, right? You start to test ideas. You start to put your ideas down on paper. You start to recognize patterns and ask people and get people's opinions. And eventually, over time, it converges once you go through this cyclical, iterative process to create an awesome product. So it's an amazing, really collaborative process. And over the course of the process, we consider all sorts of input. So things like business strategy, brand guidelines, metrics, technology, user research. I mean, we even look at your competitor products and see what they're missing, like what users hate about their products. And we involve all sorts of people, right? So it's designers, developers, like even designers and developers that are a part of the project. Everybody has an opinion, and everybody's a designer, including developers, right? Everybody has a fresh eye that they can offer. But partners, right? Partners of the firm you're working with, customers and users, because there's a difference between the two, and stakeholders, so people you're working with on the project. And so at the end of this process is something really amazing. It's an amazing idea. It's inspiring, right? Because you've just spent sometimes from a matter of weeks or a matter of months gathering data, collaborating, right? Going through this immense creative process. But the deliverables that a lot of designers output are so confined. It doesn't accurately represent this brilliance, right? So this sheer brilliance that comes from this design process, it's represented by two-dimensional, unimaginative outputs like personas, user flows, maps, style guides, wireframes. There's all this stuff. Like this is just a bunch of stuff I threw up onto the presentation, but this is just a small percentage of all the deliverables that come out of the user experience design process. And it just doesn't cut it, right? There's so much, it's so inspiring, it's so brilliant, but to have everything two-dimensional, static, it's kind of boring. It doesn't do it justice. But don't get me wrong, they're completely necessary. And as a matter of fact, it's critical for all the big innovations that we have today. So I'm going to make the argument that our deliverables must be as dynamic as our process. And a lot of designers are already doing this by using prototyping. And prototyping is what I think and what we do at Pixl is the most effective way to improve designs, to gather data, and to ultimately make awesome products. But for those of you that aren't designers, this is relevant for organizations because every organization benefits from an innovation and strategy process, and every innovation and strategy process can benefit from anything like prototyping. So before I elaborate on that, let me just quickly define what is prototyping. And so I won't read it out loud, I'll just give you a second to read through the definition. I'll take a sip of water. Awkward silence. So, essentially what we do is fake it till you make it. We give people fake products all the time. And by fake, I mean within the user experience design process, when we're creating interfaces, it's an actionable interface that's not necessarily connected to a backend. So it doesn't involve developers. It doesn't involve any fancy coding or databases or anything like that. So we're always in labs. We're always talking to our friends and families. We're always finding you'd be surprised at how effective a $5 Starbucks gift card and how many things you can make people do with just a $5 Starbucks gift card and say, hey, I need 20 minutes of your time. You're going to do the most ridiculous things with this app we just created, and people are on board, like almost consistently. And so what's the point of this, right? So what's the point of giving people fake products? It's back to, and I'll go all the way back. It's back to determining whether the business goals and the user goals align. So through prototyping, this is by far the most effective way to measure and to ensure that these two things are aligned. And I'll talk a little bit more about how. Go all the way back. So there's different tools that we use at Pixl. And my personal favorites, and our designers use Framer.js, which is that one right there. We use Marvel and Vision, but there's just an immense amount of incredible prototyping tools where they're so powerful, they're so effective. You don't need any coding experience from a designer's perspective. Like if you're just extremely talented visually, but you don't have any proficiency with code, you can create prototypes with a lot of these tools, and they're pretty affordable. But I'm here to tell you that you don't need any of these to be an effective prototyper. Okay, that's not necessary at all. Like you don't need to be fancy. You don't have to go out and buy like an $80 license to Framer.js and learn how to use JavaScript and CoffeeScript to make animations and prototypes and stuff like that. Just get the message across, and it could be something as simple as a paper prototype. Right? Like this is the most brilliant thing I've seen on the internet. This is like the most craftiest paper prototype I've ever seen. I love it. I'm gonna watch it again. Like you're demonstrating the experience, you're demonstrating the interaction, you're demonstrating the flow. But most importantly, you're watching your user do this and then listening to them, hearing their thoughts, watching their behavior. See what questions come to their mind as they go from screen to screen, or ask them what they expect before they pull that slide down menu. So prototypes, as I've just shown, can be easy, cheap, but most importantly, they have to be fast and disposable. They have to be done, sometimes in a matter of minutes, not just hours or days. It's all about the idea, right? It's all about the feedback. It's all about the user. It's not about what the prototype looks like. So currently, right now, I'm extremely passionate about tech and design, as I'm sure you can see. I'm just glowing with prototyping right now, right? But growing up, I was really passionate about basketball. Basketball was the center of my life. I ate, slept, everything basketball. I was a diehard Bulls fan. Grew up in the 90s watching Michael Jordan. Always pretended to be Michael Jordan. I stuck my tongue out when I would play on the streets. And during my it's totally relatable to design because the most successful basketball players, particularly like the most successful free throw shooters, no one ever said, hey, I'll sink these free throws when the game comes. I don't have to worry about practicing, right? The best free throw shooters I've ever known were guys that spent countless hours in the gym, countless repetitions. Hundreds of free throws a day, like hours. It was mind-blowing. And they were the best free throw shooters, the people that did that. And design is similar in a lot of ways because the final design is never the first design. Nobody buys a Picasso painting for whatever seven-figure amount that they pay after something that he just made on the first, maybe at the end of his career when he just built a brand for himself, right? But his first painting was never one that was the best, never one that was that left the legacy that Picasso left. So design is the same way, and prototyping is a way to get these repetitions out. And so more specifically, prototyping answers questions like, what's working, right? Did our users accomplish the goals that we want them to accomplish? And a lot of times, on the first few tries, the answer is no. But the key is to just record it, right? Learn, and then continue to iterate. What's not working? And again, this could be everything. As long as you take note, as long as you continue to learn and build on top of your initial designs, that's all that matters. But most importantly, what other ideas does this give us? I mean, like I said, this is an incredibly creative process. It's all over the place. It's extremely abstract. But how can we use this? Like, I mean, there are so many times where I build a prototype, and before I even give it to a user, it dawns on me like, oh, this could be good with, like a drawer or something like that. And so you're looking for things like, are users clicking on more icons than text? Like, where do we go from here, right? So users are clearly more responsive to icons. Or a user, you put them in front of a dashboard and they immediately try to start scrolling. Like, that's a huge insight that you have to consider when you're continuing to iterate your designs. But prototypes are very specific. Like, again, they're fast and disposable, but also focus, right? So you don't want to spend 3 months making a prototype for just like, so Facebook made a prototype. You don't want to build out the entire Facebook platform just to see how people interacted with the notification function. You want to spend days, sometimes minutes, sometimes hours, right? And you want to continue doing it as much as possible because, again, like shooting free throws, the more repetitions you have, the better. And so you have to try to crank out as many as possible. And prototyping is perfect for that. Like, you don't want to waste your time creating prototypes to test things that you know are already working. So that being said, what you do want to prototype are features that you're not sure about. And core interactions, like what is your site built off? I'm sure when they were building Twitter, the number one thing they were prototyping is how do you enter 140 characters into a box, right? Because that's the number one user function ever. And it's this massive platform that millions of people use. If you don't get that down, then you don't have Twitter. So this is a good diagram that I like to use when determining whether a function should be prototyped or not. So on the y-axis, it's a measurement of how critical a certain function is. And on the x-axis, it's a measurement of how complex the action is. And so within like this area, if it's below a certain threshold of critical and complex, then you'll know that it determines whether you should prototype or just use a quick wireframe. A great example of this would be when you're building an e-commerce website, which we've done, and we're building the About page, right? The About page isn't critical to the business success, and it's not critical to how complex the action is. It's just a user going in and gathering information. But something like the shop page or the checkout page totally requires prototyping to make sure that action is down, because that's critical to the business in terms of like how profitable they are, but also critical to the user in that it's something that should be seamless. So why prototype? I think I've made a good case so far, but I've got a few more things I want to share with you. So again, I'm totally objective towards measuring as it relates to design. This is pretty much our process where we learn, we take in information, we create ideas, we build upon them. We prototype, we put it out there, we gather more information, go back, collect data, and do it all over again, over and over and over again. And that is the definition of user-centered design, right? It's literally user-centered. You want your user to make all your decisions, not necessarily you. Like, you don't want to sit across the table from 2 other designers and argue about what color the button should be when the user can decide. So we found the most effective way of doing this, again, is prototyping. And again, it could either be buttons, it could be the general style, it could even be the content, right? So what does the button say? But I'm going to take a step back real quick. I'm going to quickly define user experience design based on what Wikipedia says, because this is really interesting. So Wikipedia says user experience design is a process of enhancing user satisfaction by improving the usability, ease of use, and pleasure provided in the interaction between the user and the product. Awesome. I love this definition. It encompasses like pretty much everything into one sentence, which is what I found in my experience like running a user experience design firm like pretty much impossible, because everybody has their own definition of it. But what stands out to me here, okay, so quickly, usability and ease of use. Prototyping, it's pretty straightforward how that helps. But what really stands out to me is pleasure provided in the interaction. How do you measure pleasure? How do you measure emotion? How do you, it's such an abstract thing. How do you put a number to it? Prototyping enables you to do this. It's more intuitive for the user instead of showing them a bunch of wireframes or images with arrows and paragraphs. The user can truly feel, and again, like it's not something that's articulated, but something that users will more often than not articulate to you without you even having to ask. A great example of this is iMessage. Now, this might not be the best example, but this example is very near and dear to my heart, and I'll talk about that a little more. But first, I'll talk about the feature specifically that I love that was definitely solved through prototyping here, that Apple did a great job of. So the iPhone 6, I have an iPhone 6. And it's big. It's bigger than the iPhone 5. And I'm not a very popular person, so this doesn't happen often. But when I do have multiple messages that I want to read, respond, and go back and scroll through the rest of my inbox messages, they make it really easy for you to do. So instead of reaching your finger all the way across the screen to hit the messages button, how many people know what I'm talking about? What happens? How else can you get back? Swipe? Yeah. So you can swipe the screen, and it takes you back to your inbox, rather than reaching your finger all the way across. I mean, it literally, I have to jerk my entire body to get my finger like to the top corner of the phone, and Apple recognized this. But LinkedIn didn't. So I'll tell you a quick story. I was walking down Michigan Avenue the other day, and I was crossing the street, and I pull out my phone, I get a notification. And it's from a friend. He's like, how's things going? Let's get together for a cup of coffee. Boom, swipe it open, easy. I get to the message, respond, cool, dude, what are you doing on Tuesday? Let's get some coffee, let's get some beers, let's get wasted. This is going to be a blast. Done, send the message. I want to get back to my newsfeed. I'm already in LinkedIn. I want to see what notifications I have. So I'm trying to swipe through the page, and I can't. It doesn't let me. So there's like the little arrow at the top left corner, and I'm crossing the street, and I try to reach for the button, and literally I'm like jerking my body because it's cold out, right? This wasn't like yesterday where it was 70 degrees and like 99% humidity. And I'm turning my hand, my body is somehow horizontal, and I drop my phone in the middle of the street. And I've had this phone since I'm a diehard Apple fan. I bought it the day it came out, and it cracked my phone. So when you want to talk about like prototyping, solving user frustrations, like that's the next level of frustration, right? This is beyond just, this is a lot of effort. This was like a $600 frustration, you know? So it's critical, right, that prototyping can expose these issues, because if we're just wireframing for iMessage, we'll see that the button is easy. All they have to do is click back and they're on the next page. But what Apple did really well through prototyping is they put the phone in the user's hand, and they observe their behavior. And that's something that you can't observe through static outputs, like wireframes or user flows or information architecture. So the next reason why prototyping is valuable, first I want to get a sense of how many developers are in the room, how many front-end or back-end developers. All right, so this is like 50% designers, 50% developers, unless you're all unicorns. So it helps communicate. How many designers have you seen with the developer make this face when you hand them wireframes? And how many developers make this face when you get a pile of wireframes, right? It's perfect. I mean, I don't even have to say anymore. But like, in an agile environment, there's a lot of back and forth. The designers and the developers work on they pass the baton back and forth to each other. So this is critical in terms of the fluidity of communication. Speaking of which, prototyping makes communication easier with stakeholders too, not just your developers and not just to your users. So a lot of our clients, they have brand guidelines, and the interaction sits within those brand guidelines. So instead of saying, hey, Mr. Client, this is going to pop out or spin or whatever, and then the client says, well, that doesn't sound like it. That sounds too bubbly. But what if it's not? Like, he never got the chance to actually see it, never actually got the chance to see it alive. So the reason I have this emoji up here, I just want to know, does anyone know what this emoji means? High five? Is it? I don't know what it means, but I get this from my friends all the time, and it's when something good happens. I think it's like, I can't. Finger football? My friend's over here. What does it mean? Like praise, right? He sends it to me all the time. Like 100. He's like, keep it 100. Cool, yeah. So To UX designers, this means something completely different. You know what this means? Wireframing. Okay, so when you're wireframing, again, it's like it's all hands and waving and drop down and blow out and hover, right? There's like this universal language of like what all these effects means that you can use with your hands. And so I'm like exhausted just moving and talking, and it gets really frustrating for whoever the audience is and for whoever's trying to explain it. Because again, I could have spent months trying to think of an interaction that was critical to the experience, to how the user feels, and I'm trying to communicate it after all this work to the client or to the user or to the stakeholder or to another designer or developer. And they're like, that's ridiculous, dude. What are you talking about? But really, it's just I'm doing a bad job of communicating it. And so this prototyping eliminates that completely. So here's an example. A few of the designers and I, sometimes we work out of 1871, and meetings are critical for essentially, like we have clients in there all the time, and we book meeting rooms consistently. So based on our own user frustrations, we were able to put together like a quick prototype for the sake of this presentation. So this prototype took less than an hour. So I'm going to show you what it's like when I talk through it through wireframes, like high fidelity wireframes too. I mean, this is fully blown out. And I'll show you what it's like using a prototype. So let's say all of you guys are Howard, there's like 100 Howard Tillmans in here. And so I walk into the room and I say, Howard, check this out. I got the greatest idea for a new meetings app. It's going to make it way easier, way more usable. Pretty simple when you log in, right? You put your company name and your password. Then it takes you to this page where you can view all the meeting rooms that are available, and through a grid where you can choose open slots. So for example, there's so many times where I just want to book a meeting at 7:30 in the morning. Just kidding, that never happens. But I could see immediately where all the meeting rooms are open. And so what happens is when I click on one of these boxes, a modal pops up and an overlay covers the screen. And then I can select one of these drop downs and select the time that I want to extend it to. I can also click the link on the top right corner, which expands this modal into showing you what a map looks like. It's because a big pain point too for a lot of users is I book a meeting room, but it's scattered all over the place and I don't know which meeting room I booked. And you can also, so once you do this and submit it, it populates on the page. And then if you want to see your schedule based on a weekly view, you click on the top, and what happens is there's no interaction. It just changes the page immediately, so the user can quickly transfer between different toggle views. And so you can see that you have a meeting on Wednesday, and then you can add more meetings that day based on what's available on the grid. I'm exhausted, okay? And I'm sure the wireframes, even though they were really high fidelity and done by one of our awesome designers, like on a whim, I still don't think it does it justice. Now, using a prototype, which in this we just use InVision and recorded the screen and made a GIF so you can see the interactions and the user flow throughout the page, I don't even have to say anything. And so again, this was done in a matter of minutes, like maybe a half hour to 45 minutes. Designing the page, inputting all the views, using InVision. So you see here, you can see the interactions of the pop-out. You can see the interaction after you click the map view and what that looks like. It's immediate. It's right there at your fingertips. You know exactly where your meeting is. Populates. You can scroll through and see what other meeting rooms are available. You can change the toggle view of whether you want to see it by week or even by month and see what schedules you have. So I want to conclude, but first, if there are any designers here that want to share their experience with other prototyping tools, so I use Framer.js, I use Marvel, and I use InVision. If there are any other apps that anybody wants to share with me, Axure? Yeah, Axure is a really good one. I haven't used it that much though, but so she says it's an interactive prototyping tool. So Axure is a really good one. Where's Caesar? What's up, Caesar? You use any prototyping tools? Proto.io, that's a good one. Caesar's a good friend of mine. He's a designer. Okay, so just if there's 3 things that I want you to take away from this talk, it's prototypes are dynamic deliverables, and they align with the dynamic process that came way along before it. They're fast, disposable, and focused. And they help, right? So they make your designs measurable. They give insight into the emotional component, something that's like nearly impossible to measure. They help easily expose pain points, and they help us communicate our ideas. Any questions?